Hey now, yeah! Welcome to the Friday show. I have one of the smartest people in the entire... It's a speaker, a musician, an award-winning journalist, and she's written several books, all on different subjects. I can't say enough about Celeste Headlee. We had a great conversation about, well, I don't even know how to cover it, but we talked about everything from politics to Trump's legal issues to her new short book on self-compassion to the racial history of this country, which she's written so much about. This is a great conversation. You know, it always is when you're talking to Celeste Headlee. Very excited to have her joining me. Had a great time at last night's hangout. I'm at my parents' house for a few days, and then next week I'm going to Australia. Can you believe it? Anyway, well, enough of me. Let's get to my conversation with the brilliant Celeste Headlee. That's what you are here for. Thanks again to everybody who was at the hangout. Had a lot of fun. Real excited to be hanging out in my childhood home with mom and dad who are staring at me while I record this. It's super awkward, so let's just throw to Celeste.
Oh, what a huge privilege it is to get some time to talk to Celeste Headlee because she's in tremendous demand. There are now 3 podcasts that she's hosting, and all of last week she was hosting on NPR. I was like, hey, Celeste, any time to join this week? She's like, sorry, I'm hosting the national talk show all week, but next week. And I got her, and I'm so happy to get her, and I'm so happy you're so busy. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's always great to talk to you. When I have the chance, I always like to.
Yes. And I love to listen to you talking to anybody. So let's do it. There's plenty to talk with you about. So let's start with some of the current event stuff. Quickly, I just want to, get your take. I mean, maybe you talked about this last week on the radio with a bunch of people, or maybe you didn't. But Trump's legal issues and your thoughts about where we are at here right now, this many days after January 6th, with a very likely indictment for January 6th, the previous indictments. It's a very hot summer in more ways than one, Celeste. What are your thoughts on his legal issues and how they affect the election, the country, anything else?
I mean, it's obvious why he would want to be delayed. I mean, I just got to say that I can't say often enough how I never would have believed we would be here.
Oh.
I say it's obvious why he wants to delay it because there seems to be no question that he still believes he would win the presidency again. And then he thinks that he can make all of his legal problems go away by manipulating the legal system. And yet there's part of me that's like, is that really where we are? That I'm ready to admit that I believe our democracy is so weak at this point that I can shrug off the fact that, of course, if he becomes president, he'd be able to walk in there and everyone else would just, allow him to do that. But yeah, I think that's sort of where we are, which, yeah. So I do think he's in real trouble. And I think that a lot of people at this point are thinking, would he actually serve time on that? I don't. That's a real democratic question, right? Like, yeah. We keep hitting these milestones of, do we think, what would we do? We've never had an ex-president indicted before. Well, we've crossed that Rubicon. We've never had a ex-president convicted before. We might cross that Rubicon. And would a president serve time? I don't know. Other countries have had a president in jail.
Well, you mentioned other countries, and that's my big thing I think about a lot is, and you've covered news and politics for a long time, what about accountability? Isn't that what we need?
Yes, it is exactly what we need. And I think it's not just what we need, Pete. I think it's requisite. We have to. Yep. At this point, our democracy demands that we prove that nobody is above the law. I mean, that's what the United States is supposedly founded on, that we are not, that there is no royal family that is above the law, that there is no king or queen. Like, that's what the United States is supposed to be about. And so if we can't prove that at this point, then what is this that we're in? What kind of country is this?
There's so many criminals that we haven't gotten accountability for, so many white collar criminals, so many powerful people, powerful entities from, Enron to BP. And we've seen a lack of accountability from, Nixon to the Vietnam War to the Iraq War to the 2008 financial crisis and so on. But I feel like you've written so much about race that there's not been accountability for America's racial past, for slavery and Jim Crow and so on. And we're not expecting any accountability anytime soon. As a matter of fact, because of the Supreme Court, we're losing the ability to even, create opportunity, much less create accountability. So what do you think about where we're at with that major original sin issue, a lack of accountability for?
It's interesting. If you are a student of history, it's just so depressing that our species, Homo sapiens, just does not learn from the past. We just don't. And we never have. We just continually make the same exact mistakes. Not even that our great-grandparents made or grandparents. We make the same mistakes our parents made again and again and again and again. That's number one. But it makes me laugh to hear people say things like, why should I have to, mostly white people say, why should I have to suffer, for example, affirmative action, because I never owned slaves, right? Which is this idea that the institution of slavery was only somehow confined to these few plantations owned by a few wealthy people in the South, as though nobody in the North was at all involved in the institution of slavery, which is ridiculous.
The entire economy was wrapped up in it.
The entire economy. But also there's this idea that it was somehow really, really long ago, and it really was not. And there never has been accountability. I host this podcast for Slate called Hear Me Out, which is an attempt to prove that you can disagree on some of the most contentious issues that we have right now and disagree a lot without calling each other names, without getting into a fight, respectfully, and sometimes even find common ground. That's the whole premise. And doing it in an entertaining way that people want to listen to. And one of the recent episodes was about reparations. And the guy I was talking to, a black dude, was saying that we shouldn't pay reparations because it was a really long time ago. And I was like, it really wasn't. And at what point, if I go into your house and I just steal your shit, if I wait long enough, I just own it now? And he was like, yeah. And one of his examples is like, okay, so if the Nazis stole Jewish people's stuff, they can just wait it out and then we shouldn't try to repatriate that? And his answer was, yeah, absolutely. Then they should just own it then. And this is the kind of logic of this lack of accountability that at some point you should just let it go. Like, this is what is sort of like living in our society right now. Like, what do you make of this?
Nowhere is that more ever present than Native American communities.
Yes.
We can't get water.
What?
Yeah.
I know. My God. I don't understand people thinking that at some point, doesn't matter what the sin was. It doesn't matter. You get away with it.
Well, your comments and analysis about Americans or humans and their memories is so important to this specific issue here because they're erasing history right now. They're trying to get rid of history or rewrite history. It makes it a whole lot easier to forget Holocaust, slavery, genocide, wars. You mentioned we're making the same mistakes of our parents' generations. And it made me think of, actually, my dad's generation made the same mistake twice. First, they went into Vietnam and witnessed that and experienced that. And then they went into Iraq, which was the same thing in so many ways. And they did it. And that's why my dad was against both those wars. He's no hippie, but he's like, what? We're not going to win either of these. And so if we erase the history or if we teach a different history, then of course we're going to make these same mistakes over and over.
Following historians on social media is both one of the most enjoyable and heartbreaking things you can possibly do.
Yes.
Because I can't imagine any of them have any hair left. The wig sales among historians must be rapid because they must just tear their hair out in giant tufts.
There was no other metaphor that you could go with than hair, pulling out the hair. Celeste. Am I even on camera? Am I on the camera?
I guess I don't.
So insensitive.
I guess I don't think of that as painful of a loss.
I lost it the old-fashioned way. So no, yeah, because by the way, if reading those historians, or as you and I both do, interviewing those historians, it's pretty tough, and it's because we're seeing. Because why? I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, because A, people don't know history, and B, they rewrite it all the time to make themselves feel better, and then they don't care about history. But they feel as though it doesn't matter either. So even when they are corrected, even if they do finally decide that they're going to accept what the truth is about history, then they'll just decide that that doesn't matter anymore. Like humans are I'm going to say one more thing about this, which is that it cracks me up that for so long we fool ourselves into thinking that the reason Homo sapiens sort of succeeded along the evolutionary chain was because of our advanced intelligence. Like we are the most illogical thinkers. I mean, the fact that we thought we were logical thinkers, like that is so ridiculously, ludicrously stupid ever. We are not smart thinkers. Like the only way we survived was through community. We survived through numbers and cooperation. Like the fact that we were able to fool ourselves into thinking it was because we were so brilliant when dolphins were right there. I mean,
I think a lot about that, and let's tie it into a current event which you've been really railing about, because the executives and the shareholders in the entertainment industry are illogically holding the rest of labor hostage, and anybody who loves entertainment, which is everybody. And I think that's an example of what you're talking about in terms of like they're eating their own. There's so many examples. I wonder if that's too forced of a segue, or if you can wrap that in.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what is stupid. It's this completely unsustainable and totally illogical societal worship of wealth. We have this idea that rich people are smarter and better and more virtuous. And when you get into these extreme levels of wealth, this idea that the pursuit of wealth is a virtue in and of itself. Personally, I feel that the existence of billionaires is an example of the failure of an economic system. The fact that capitalism has produced so many billionaires proves that capitalism is a failure.
The least controversial idea in my. It's a very non-controversial opinion, and listening to people try to argue that is not fun. It's just not fun.
It's not, and there's no such thing as somebody who became a billionaire ethically. You cannot become a billionaire in an ethical
Agreed.
way.
Although I tried last night by winning Lotto. Although, that wouldn't have been ethical, would it? Because Lotto destroys the lives of poor people.
That's right. It's not fully ethical. But the fact. The writer's strike is a perfect example. And I will say, just as a caveat here, that I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, although many, many people at NPR are. Our contract is a broadcast contract. It is not the same one that the writers are covered by or the actors. And so therefore, any strike does not affect ours. We are still working and still being paid. With that said, you have these people like Bob Iger and that unnamed person who said they wanted to wait it out until people lost their homes.
Yeah, some executive said that, right? We don't know who that was.
We don't. They were unnamed. But they're willing to say these things openly, meaning that they don't think these things are particularly shameful. Meaning two things. A, they think these things are non-controversial for the most part. And B, they are surrounded by other people who believe these things and agree with them. Which is A, mind-blowing, but B, it means our society has come to a point in which the worst wealth has gotten so entirely out of hand, in that wealth in and of itself is seen to be a higher good.
Yes, and it's the definition of success, and it will make you happy and everything else.
And it in and of itself is a virtue, period. Right? Like, this is how things, I have to have more money. Like Bob Iger earns almost $80,000 a day, can, without batting an eye, say that these writers who don't make $26,000 a year, enough to get health insurance, are being unreasonable, right? He can say that with a straight face while he's at this retreat that's so lavish, it's known as the billionaires camp. Like, you're a writer. I mean, that's so ludicrous. You wouldn't put it in a sitcom. Like, it wouldn't even be believable as a storyline. It would be ridiculous. They would be in Benny Hill. It would be dumb.
Well, if you were writing a story about a rich asshole, it would be a pretty perfect line.
Yeah, I guess so. But it would be like broad comedy, like
Right.
Faulty Towers type of, But like, that's how far we've come. Like, it's so stupid. It's just stupid.
Let me segue out of that into something that wealth has affected so much, and something that you are covering as the host of yet another new podcast. It's called Big Sugar, and it tells a story of exploitation on Florida's sugarcane fields. And what is this, like a 10-part series that you have got hosting here?
Yeah, it's taken 2.5, 3 years of investigation. It actually started back quite some time ago, decades ago, with a Vanity Fair piece about a class action lawsuit filed by the workers, mostly Jamaican immigrant workers that were working the fields and harvesting sugar by hand. And the sugar companies had cheated them out of their wages to just a disgusting degree. These wealthy billionaires, speaking of billionaire, sugar owners who are being subsidized by American taxpayers, by the way, were cheating these desperately poor immigrant workers from mostly Jamaica out of their wages. And they were trying to get their money back, what they were owed. And they didn't. But we bring it up to date to now, when they basically mechanized the harvesting of sugar in the United States. It is still harvested by hand in many places in the United States, in the world. But essentially, through the Farm Bill, the United States taxpayers pay billions of dollars to sugar farmers to prop up the price of sugar. We pay them to farm sugar, to produce sugar, in order to keep supposedly prices stable of sugar, which started in World War II, so that we wouldn't ever not have sugar, right? And then our sugar that we pay for in the United States is the most expensive of all industrialized nations by a lot. So we pay more. So we're paying them billions through our taxes. Then we pay more in the grocery store. Then they burn their sugar fields, scattering ash all over mostly poor neighborhoods in the Florida, and just decimating the Florida Everglades and not having to clean that up and creating an environmental disaster. And they might be stuck with the bill of trying to clean that up environmentally as well. So we are paying and paying and paying and paying. It's a climate disaster as well. So that's sort of what this goes into. There was a reckoning for the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
There was a reckoning, obviously, for the pharmaceutical industry as well. We're hoping this is a reckoning for the sugar industry, because another thing that has never come out is the way the sugar industry absolutely manipulates research into what sugar does to your body, the medical research into that, to try and pretend like it was fat that was making people overweight and sick.
Yeah,
and
who was that journalist that wrote that great book a few years back about sugar? I forget, but there's a tremendous amount of research now on the poison that sugar is, as much as we love it. But you know what else I love? I mean, I love tobacco. I love opiates. There's a lot of things I love. But you mentioned the reckoning. And the reckoning, you didn't call it justice, but the reckoning was monster lawsuits in the billions and billions of dollars against tobacco, against the Sackler family and the opiate makers, I believe. But, people didn't go to jail, right? But the point being, in this case with the sugar industry, that those workers who were exploited paid.
Yeah, I mean, they lost their case, and the statute of limitations is gone. But in this case, they had to go back hundreds of years to like colonial law in order to win their case against these poor H-1N1 visa workers. Like they really had, and they spent more money on legal fees. We don't know for sure, but it's a good chance they spent more money on legal fees just to avoid paying these workers what they owed than just paying them. The other sugar countries settled, but these workers never got what they owed. It's
the other country settled.
Other companies settled.
Got it.
But again, pennies on the dollar. These this particular two people that we focus on that own the U.S. Sugar are these two brothers, incredibly wealthy brothers from Cuba, who were basically princes. They owned a palace. A family owned a palace in Cuba. They lost everything when Castro took over, and they fled to the United States, determined to build an empire here, and that's exactly what they did. And, we visited their gigantic multi-billion-dollar yacht, and they own homes just above Mar-a-Lago and in Florida. I mean, it's just, we never could talk to them. If you're wealthy in the United States, this as well I do. You never do have to answer questions if you don't want to. You tried to get them, obviously, on the record. Yeah, so many times. But then we went to one of the sugar towns workers live. We parked in a parking lot at an elementary school, which is right next to one of the sugar fields. And at that point, they'd finished the harvest and they were burning the field, and all these critters, not all the critters make it out, but they're all fleeing the fires. They put down these pots of like tar or whatever, and they set them on fire. And we get out of the car in the elementary school parking lot, and I was almost immediately just covered in this greasy ash from the
people
burning
live there.
Sugar fields. Oh yeah, these children, they're the slides and all their toys and stuff in the recess in the play yard were covered in ash. Big Sugar, how the sugar industry exploited migrant workers in the 80s and 90s. You can go listen to that series that Celeste has been, as she said, working on and doing journalism on for years. It's out now. I feel like people in Florida, I remember I learned it while I was hosting live radio at SiriusXM. Someone maybe called in. Maybe I hosted a segment. I don't know. But I feel like people in Florida are pretty familiar with the history and current activity of the sugar industry and the way that they obviously control so much of the state and federal government in terms of lobbying, donating, and getting what they want. Yeah, and there have been lawsuits trying to get the sugar industry to have to pay for the cleanup of the Everglades in particular, because the damage has just been catastrophic. Yes. I don't think that's going to happen. Let's stay in Florida and just talk a little bit about your thoughts on what's happening in that state and how Ron DeSantis has both legislated and been so anti-LGBT. I was talking to my friend Dean Obeidallah, and he lays it out so perfectly about, like, it's always the same playbook, demonizing a group. Post 9/11, it was Muslims, and we had to learn everything about Sharia law, a thing that wasn't happening. And then, of course, 2020, electing President Trump, that was hugely about immigration. And now the target is on LGBT folks across the country, as far as like taking down rainbow flags, much less legislating and going back to taking books out and erasing history and so on. A lot of people say that that's going to backfire. It might work in a more conservative state, but that's not going to fly in most of the country. What are your thoughts about that playbook, and how effective it is, and if most of the country is kind of past? I do think it's confusing, because a lot of people understand lesbian, gay issues, same-sex issues, but the trans issue is new and surprising and demagogued all day, every day. What are your thoughts on DeSantis, how effective he's been in Florida, and if that playbook works for the rest of the country? I mean, the reason why people keep doing this is because it has always worked. Always. George W. Bush got reelected because of gay marriage. We know that. Karl Rove put gay marriage on the ballot in state after state after state. And that's how George Bush, I mean, he didn't get reelected, but that's how he was able to even get close enough to, speaking of Florida, to become president again. He ran a campaign saying, if I'm elected, I won't allow for there to be marriage equality in it. And it was effective. He put gay marriage on the local ballots in many of these states, which brought people to the polls who hate gay people, who are also happen to be the kind of people who were going to vote for George W. Bush. A lot of the people who hate gay people are also surprisingly gay. Conservative. Yes, that is actually true. Gay and not wanting anyone to know about it. Yes. The thing is that, there's hardly any trans people in the world. I mean, they are a tiny population. But the fact of the matter is the same reason why Nixon used the Southern strategy, right? Using hatred and fear always works. It always will work. It is always because of the way our amygdala works in the Homo sapiens, it is always a stronger motivator than positive emotions.
And you're talking, though, about
works.
winning elections and convincing people, but maybe just talk about that in terms of media, because whether it be popular podcasts, many of the most popular podcasts certainly have that model, but more importantly, they like focus on true crime, which is really scary. That's not quite hatred, but it could be. But so many of the radio shows and YouTube channels that are wildly popular are riding on that theme. And you and I could never do that kind of content. We never would. We never could. And so we'll never have hundreds of millions of listeners trying to create that. But I wanted to get your take on how it plays out in media and why it's so popular, not only in winning elections and winning votes and dividing people.
Yeah, I mean, it's the negativity bias that our brains are wired to pay more attention to negative information than positive. I mean, it's more, if something is going to harm you, it's more important that you remember what it looks like, right? It's more important to recognize what a rattler looks like than a garden snake.
Right.
So there's that. But you're right. Like I also have another podcast out right now called The Freeway Phantom, which is about true crime. But when I first signed on to do it, I was like, no, this podcast needs to be about real themes. It needs to be about the relationship between the Black community and law enforcement. It is about these broader issues. I'm not interested in doing, just talking about just a serial killer. It needs to be about what's really going on.
That's
here.
Interesting because I didn't see it. I saw it as you're talking about crimes that affected communities.
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to do some salacious.
Yeah. Like that's why we don't need to explain what true crime is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, exactly. Not that all true crime podcasts are that way, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's always going to work. It's always going to motivate voters to go to the polls by telling them to be afraid of something. Always.
But don't you think the tail is the wags? What's the phrase? Wags the dog. In that it's the people in right wing media, the most influential ones, of course, that are really creating policy in the Republican Party at the state, local, and federal level. It does not happen really on the left. It really doesn't. The left is more reactionary and subject to activists and what they want, I suppose. But I feel like so much of the policy and laws that get created were come up by some asshole in his studio right before he went on the air, like just made up shit.
Yeah, and also I mean there is some good evidence that the conservative brain also tends to be one that is more attracted to authoritarianism. I mean, that's a little bit in its infancy, that kind of research. So it's not, I don't fully know for sure. But I will say that I think they've taken it too far. And this is just my theory. So you can tell me what you think. I think that they've taken it so far now that people on the left are now afraid of the right. I think it's now come around to where now they've taken it so far that their use of fear is now motivating people on the left by making them afraid.
Example, guns.
Guns, Also, they're afraid of what law, abortion. They're afraid of what laws they're going to pass. They're afraid of the Supreme Court. They're afraid of what's going to happen. They're afraid of what they're going to do next. Like, I think there's real fear of what conservatives will do while in power. And among the left.
Are you saying that I would say that has actually created action as a result.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what I'm saying. It's like that, fear is always a motivator, and the right has often used that as a strong and powerful motivator. They have made people afraid of gays. They've made people afraid of Black people. They've made people afraid of immigrants. And that has always been often more powerful than what the left has used in terms of let's all come together and work together and make a more beautiful society. But it's now coming around to the point where it's working against them because the right has now created a situation in which they themselves are what.
You can understand why when they pass laws that allow anybody to have as many guns as they want and take them on a college campus, into a bar, wherever they want, a school, would motivate people to vote. You get that. But I wonder what your thoughts are, because I think there's a fair debate about this, specifically when it comes to black voters and voting rights. My feeling and what I've seen just in terms of journalism and, plenty of anecdotes for generations is, well, Republicans have tried to make it harder for likely Democrats to vote, and specifically, obviously, a history of making it harder for black folks to vote and where they live. And as a result of these laws that they've tried to pass, it actually animates and motivates. I don't know if it really plays in exactly the paradigm you're saying, but you could say makes black folks afraid that worse things are going to happen to them if they don't vote. So while they're trying to take away their vote, it actually backfires on them and turns more people out, more black folks out to vote as a result of that. And versus the argument that I heard last week on a black hosted and mostly black audience, I was joining them about black voters being disenchanted by, the Biden administration and what has or haven't done. I haven't really seen that. I wonder what your thoughts on disenchantment with government and politics versus the suppression of voting in terms of, will black folks continue to save us?
I think that anytime that you start clamping down and on the civil rights of African Americans, that's always going to backfire. I mean, as to the extent that which they have the power to fight back, they will. And that has been the case even before the Civil War. So, I think they never have trusted the government to protect their civil rights. I think to the extent that they will do anything within their power, they will, and they always have. I don't think they have never, nobody's going to speak for the black community, but history tells us that there have been, including Barack Obama, no perfect presidents for African American people. But there have been really, really imperfect presidents and horrible presidents. And, there will come a day, I assume, when the United States won't be systemically racist. I don't know if I can say that with a straight face. I mean, I don't know. Maybe
I just feel like it's just such a hard subject, because when I read headlines and I see the policies, it's like they're taking away hard fought wins, not creating more wins. So, if we want to talk about spiritually, emotionally, individually, much less as a movement of civil rights, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I don't know how you would phrase it, but it's like we had a lot of steps forward during our lifetime, and it seemed like it was going to continue to progress the arc of justice. But it does feel like we've had, with the Voting Rights Act gutted, start there, much less affirmative action, healthcare, employment opportunity, whatever. It does feel like we're going the wrong direction.
I know, but I just feel like, and certainly in terms of my family or any black person, that happens again and again. What do you think Reconstruction was? It was like this massive expansion in the rights and power of black people, and then pulling the rug right back over. Every single time black Americans are given something, it's taken back, and it's taken back with prejudice. And the pun is absolutely intended. So that happens over and over and over and over again. When black folks are given any kind of power or rights, it makes white people afraid. And there's a backlash.
Always the case.
Yes,
well,
always.
Maybe we can wrap it up with something thoughtful, because I'm going to buy and listen to your, what are we calling this?
It's a short ebook.
Short ebook titled "It Starts with Self-Compassion: Practical Roadmap." There's a lot of things I love you for: your brain, your knowledge on so many things, your humanity, your honesty, your vulnerability, and you've written books on 3 very different subjects. And now this book, I love that you're talking and writing about this. I love the type of journalist who covers the issues that you cover, and also, because of her, in this case, curiosity, is always learning more about so many different things. Why this? What's this about? I just found out about this right before I went on, so I'm not a prepared interviewer, and I apologize, but I'm going to buy it and listen to it. It starts with self-compassion, a practical roadmap. Who are you? A journalist or a practitioner, or both?
Both. I mean, I feel it's like a natural extension of the work I've been doing. It certainly came out of, I started to read and do research about self-compassion when I was working on the book Do Nothing, which is a very self-compassionate book, right? It's,
yes.
about really letting go.
Well,
yeah.
Didn't think about it. Yeah.
And even more so when I began to do work on the book Speaking of Race, which is all about, just acknowledging when you have made mistakes and embracing mistakes is just part of life, which again is a very self-compassionate. That's part of what self-compassion is understanding that mistakes are very much human and acknowledging them with honesty and bravery and moving on. It makes you very resilient. And it made me really curious about the idea of self-compassion. The other thing is that I'm a practicing Buddhist, and self-compassion is although it's extremely new to the Western world, it is extremely ancient in the Eastern world. And Buddha, perhaps the world's first psychologist, was teaching and studying self-compassion for centuries. And in fact, in Tibetan tradition and in Buddhist tradition, the word compassion was always intended to mean compassion both for others and for yourself. So I started doing more research into this, especially during the pandemic, because people really needed it. People were beating themselves up, and they were throwing themselves into their work and just burning out and being so hard on themselves and going in the wrong direction and doing things that were counterproductive when it came to well-being. And so I started thinking, okay, if they're going the wrong way and doing things that aren't helping them, what could they do? And I started doing this research, and I just thought I'd write this really quick. Okay, one thing that I'm really good at is sort of breaking things down and saying, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, here's how you do this. And so that's what this book is like, okay, let me explain in really, really simple terms what self-compassion is and what it is not. And here's how you do this. Here's how you add it to your day. Even if you only have 30 to 60 seconds, here's how you add this practice to your day. And it will make things better. Guaranteed.
I am so excited to hear it. I love your guarantee. Just one quick question. As I told you before I started taping, I've been thinking and talking a lot about how I and a lot of other folks, I know this is resonating with listening, have identified an issue I have with self-pity. And I found out how pernicious, and I learned that from, I try to practice Buddhism. I don't think I can call myself that yet, but I'm trying every day. I meditate every day, and I'm reading about Buddhism every day. And Pema Chodron writes about this, a Buddhist nun, about self-pity. And I read this book like several times, and yet short little book, Taking the Leap, amazing book, life-changing book. It's like my Bible. And I missed that self-pity issue. And I wonder how the two coincide, self-compassion and self-pity, because there's an overlap there for sure. You can have bad things happen. You can feel badly about those things happening. You can feel badly for yourself. And then it should lead, I think, then to self-compassion. How am I right on the journey? You are. So self-pity happens when you start ruminating. So one of the there's 3 components to self-compassion, one of which is kindness. But another essential component to sort of like the 3-legged stool of self-compassion is common humanity, which is basically saying, like, let's say that you dropped your cell phone and cracked your screen, right? Like, you're self-pitying and being, God, this is the last thing I need today. Why today of all days when things are just so hard for me and blah, 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 right? That would be self-pitying. But common humanity to be like, oh my God, this has happened. People, drop their cell phone. This happens. Nobody likes it when they crack their cell phone. I'm going to get through this. This shit happens. It's awful. Everyone hates this. Okay. What do I do? Why
right?
me? No,
like,
I would
common
say,
humanity.
Why me? No. Why my phone? Like, I didn't have enough setbacks today. Now my phone, this happened to me yesterday, although this is a joke because I didn't fall into self-pity, but the pool, this is a hilarious one. My pool that I have, because I have a pool, because I'm doing well. I mean, it's above ground, but it's, I'm having an issue with the pH balance, which I know nothing about. My wife takes care of it. So I spent the entire afternoon trying to figure this out and shock it and whatever. And I started to get frustrated that I'd lost so much time. I didn't head into self-pity because of my practice, but old Pete might have. But that's a hilarious point of what I'm trying to make. You have so much that when you have a pool, that when your pool needs now I've got to stop and take care of it and I can't do my work or whatever it is. It's that.
But it's this kind that you cannot forget the kindness, which is that, look, the thing you're doing with your pool is frustrating and it sucks. Like, that's true. That can be true at the same time that it's also true that suffering is part of life for everybody. Like, you don't get through life as a human being without going through this. Like, everybody has to deal with this shit. And it is harder for some people. Some people have it harder, but it doesn't mean that what you're going through right now isn't tough. True. Doesn't make it less tough. Like, you have to be kind to yourself at the same time that you're realizing that suffering in and of itself connects you to everyone else. That is part of what connects you. That's why one of the very first things is life is suffering. It's not, nobody's out to get you. If there's no special reason for it, there's no meaning to suffering. There's no
I feel like one of the first things in Buddhism I think you're talking about, but I feel like meditation helps me recognize my thoughts, and my thoughts are me flagellating myself. How did you let this happen? How come you didn't do better? How come you didn't think? And the meditation captures that, allows me to see it, and then I can get to the self-compassion. But I can't get to the self-compassion. And so sometimes I'll be trashing myself to somebody, and they're like, don't talk to yourself that way. I'm like, all right, okay.
So
sorry,
one of the first exercises that you do is to reframe it and think, okay, if this happened to one of my best friends, if my friend called me up and was like, my fucking pool, and I should, I'm totally privileged. I have this pool. I'm lucky to have it, but it's so frustrating. Like, what advice would you give them? What'd you say to them if it was your friend?
I would say I would give them all kinds of advice on what they should do, take action, and then I would probably put them down for feeling bad about their pool because I'm a bad person and a bad friend. No, I would. You'd
probably be like, what do you need? Look, let me bring you a coffee. Like, I would probably be like, okay, let me come over and help you. Like, you're in a bad place. Like, dude, you're spiraling. That's what I'd be like. You're spiraling. Okay, you're becoming ridiculous. Look, what do you need? What do you need? You need a Coke? You need a break?
I think we all need more friends like Celeste Headlee. I think is what we need. Who understand.
We're so much nicer to our friends than we are to ourselves. And so self-compassion just asks that you be as nice to yourself as you are to your friends. That's all.
Love it. Love it. Can't wait to read or actually listen. I'm going to buy the audio because I got a long drive to my parents' house. It starts with self-compassion, a practical roadmap. And, we did it. Celeste, just so excited when I get to talk to you. And always love reading everything you're writing. We didn't even get to your latest Here's a Thought, which everybody has to subscribe to. It's such a unique newsletter, so different than almost anything else out there, as is everything that you do, that you put your touch on. All right, enough flattery. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's always great to talk to you, Pete. Have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, well, that's all I have for you. And now I don't even know how this is going to sound because I'm recording this right off the computer. Access to resources are apparently limited all of a sudden here at my childhood home in upstate New York. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, please sign up for a paid subscription because that's how I'm planning to pay for my daughter's college. Speaking of which, she's going off to college. Very excited. I'm going off to Australia next week, so if you have advice on how to handle a 20-hour flight or anything I should do or see or be in Sydney, Australia, plan on posting shows from down there. You know me. I'm always going to be recording something. So I'll be erratic for the next couple of weeks in terms of posting, but I cannot do this without your support. So thanks so much, and I love you and all that you are because you matter. I guess that's what I want to say. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You
to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand